All right, so again, my name is Christina Madrid. I'm here for Jen tonight. She had something come up last minute and said wanted me to share her most sincere apologies for not being able to be here with you all tonight. So this is the second to the last lesson tonight. And then your remaining schedule, again, as you see on the screen, you'll meet tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Eastern time for a review. And Thursday, December 5th will be the last lesson. And another review session is going to be held on Friday and at 8 o'clock Eastern time. And then again, Saturday at noon Eastern time. The login information will be on the Hive. And then Jen also wanted to share and remind you of the Hive requirements. And again, any questions you have about this, the remaining schedule and the Hive requirements, please connect with Jen, either by email or during live class tomorrow or both, whatever works for you best. So I've been teaching here at HR.com for a little over 2 years, and I've taught all the classes, PHR, the PHR, XPHR prep, and the APHR prep, and I'm excited to be with you here tonight. I am SPHR certified since 2002, which makes me a dinosaur. And so, wow, I can just really appreciate your being here in this class right now, this time of year. It's a busy, busy, busy time of year, not only, you know, in the HR world for a lot of people, but also with the holidays and year-end activities, etc. So thank you all for being here, and let's get started. We're starting off tonight with risk management. If I can get my screen to move here. And risk management is a very, very, very brief section. In fact, the briefest you will see in this book. So there are 4 strategies that we're going to talk about to mitigate risk within the organization. And you'll see risk management show up. You know, tonight we're also going to talk about safety, and we're going to talk about health. Risk management you're going to see show up in those sections as well. So the takeaways here for this particular section are there really are 4 main strategies for developing ways to protect the interests of the organization. And so the first is avoidance, and basically this is really straightforward. If you know and can predict that something is going to be a risk for the organization, avoid it completely. The book provides some examples, but you can think about your own facility and your own workplace. How would you avoid risk? The book talks about, you know, not building in a highly dangerous area. But if you have to, there are also there are other strategies that you can use in the organization. Okay, so Walmart, I want to share, is one organization that is doing more to avoid health risks in the organization. So I don't know if they have this in your area or if you've seen this happening, but when you walk into Walmart, what do you see? What kind of food is in Walmart for customers and anyone? You can drop in at Walmart. You can pretty much spend your day and get everything done there. But what do you see typically right when you walk in the door? What kind of food or food chain specifically is inside a lot of Walmarts? Ah, McDonald's, yes. So I see some Subways in here. Yes, so the Walmart is now removing the McDonald's in, I don't know if it's all of their stores yet, but Walmart is definitely trending more toward health and wellness for their employees. And if you think about it, when a Walmart employee goes on break and they're hungry, that McDonald's is so convenient. So they're going to avoid the risk the health risks, the implications from eating a fast food diet by taking out the McDonald's and replacing them with Subway and other healthier options. So that's an example of avoidance. A transfer is basically, it's like your workers' comp insurance, essentially. You're insuring your organization, you're transferring the risk for workers' comp to protect against liability in the event that, you know, when you or I get injured at work. And then mitigation, sometimes you can't avoid or transfer risk. So there are two ways that organizations mitigate risk. And basically that's reducing the probability that the risk will occur. So safety training is one thing that many of you do to avoid workplace injuries in the first place. And then reducing the severity of the damage. So weather patterns are unpredictable. People work and live in areas where we have fires and we have earthquakes, and I'm on the West Coast. I'm in Arizona now, but I grew up in California my entire life. And, you know, so we had, you know, earthquakes there. I've worked for a company in the Midwest. I've worked at home for about 10 years, but I worked for a company in the Midwest, and tornadoes were the big thing there. Hurricanes, I now work for a company based in Florida, so hurricanes are big things. So, so you mitigate against the severity of the damage that could be caused by, for example, those types of natural disasters. Sometimes organizations just have to accept the risk. That's the fourth strategy. And basically it says, you know, we know there's a risk, but we don't think it's that big. We don't think it's big enough for us to worry about. So we're just going to kind of wait and see what happens. But not knowing that a risk is even a potential is a form of acceptance, right? So acceptance could also mean that we just had no idea that a risk would even occur. And so the company did nothing about it and something happened. And now going forward, of course, we're going to make sure that we use one of the other three strategies to protect us, to protect our employees, our customers, our intellectual property, etc. Yeah, so transferring risk is one example that the book uses is having workers' compensation insurance. That's transferring the risk for workplace injuries. It's one of the required things that you have to have. But let's say that you send people abroad. Let's say you have employees who travel abroad for work, and maybe they're visiting potentially dangerous areas. You might hire a chauffeur to make sure that they get, you know, from the airport to their hotel, and then from their hotel to the business meetings, and then to dinner, and then back to their hotel again, so that you're mitigating the risk that something could happen to them while in, you know, these somewhat tumultuous circumstances. So that would be a transfer. And you would also buy travel insurance and that kind of stuff. Okay, so very brief section, but again, this idea of risk management is going to come up again. Just think about it as we head into talking in our next section, talking about safety. So be able to list and describe the 4 strategies for managing risk is the test your knowledge question on page 172. And let's move on to our next section here. Again, page 173 and going into the topic of safety. The objectives for this section are on the screen. I know we've talked about OSHA before, so we're really going to go more into detail about OSHA and what it really takes to create and maintain a safe working environment. And then we'll define one of your key terms, which is imminent danger. It's nice for you to come back to these objectives when you finish the lesson, and especially as you're wrapping up now. go back to all the lesson objectives and use as a study guide. So if you go back, for example, in a few weeks to the lesson objectives for this section and you see define imminent danger and you're like, I don't really remember what that is, then that's an opportunity for you to revisit that key term. All right, so what is safety? So essentially, safety laws are in place to prevent accidents and illnesses, but also provide employees with compensation for injuries and lost wages, and perhaps even more, depending on what happens in the workplace. But the safety policies and practices are in place to make sure that you're confident that you're walking into and working in safe and healthful working conditions. So OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, make sure you know those acronyms, that alphabet soup of HR. I'm sure Jen has shared this with you, that when you get questions on the test, you might see the acronym or you might see the full term, and you might also see the also known as, like when you studied wage and hour law. Make sure you know all of those terms. So according to OSHA, it's the responsibility of each employer to provide a place of employment that's free from recognized hazards that cause or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to employees. And OSHA requires employers to maintain reporting and record-keeping systems that will monitor job-related injuries and illnesses. OSHA applies to nearly all employees in the country. There are some exceptions, but the Act covers all employers and employees except those who are self-employed. So if you're self-employed, you own your own tools and you get your own work and your own jobs and you go different places, different days, you're considered self-employed, not covered by OSHA. Family farms, where only family members work. Workplaces that have other federal statutes, so federal governments and other state employers might have different protections that are available. And then again, that state and local government employers and employees, they have their own health and safety programs. I really encourage you to visit the Department of Labor website if you haven't already for other reasons at osha.gov. What I love about the government websites is that they are required legally to write in what is called plain language. So it's written at the 8th grade level, approximately 8th grade level. But sometimes our HR world gets pretty complex with legal terms, and the government websites really do a good job of explaining things in a way that we can all understand. Okay, so there's the general duty clause of OSHA, which states that every employer has to provide each employee that place of employment where you can walk into work and you're free from recognized hazards that could cause or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. And then also every employer has to comply with occupational safety and health standards that are written under the clause. Employers can be prosecuted for violating the general duty clause, even if the specific standards are not violated, but the employer was either aware of or should have been aware of a hazard that could cause serious injury or death. So the book goes into some safety statistics on pages 174 to 176. And I've never heard of any questions that come up about the different statistics specifically, but you should know the different agencies. So know about the National Safety Council, the BLS, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You're already familiar with that organization, probably again through wage and hour law and some other, but that's also a really great website. And let's talk about another key term, incidence rates. So the BLS compiles, or Bureau of Labor Statistics compiles incidence rates for occupational illnesses and injuries from employee records that you all as employers are required to keep and submit to OSHA. So the formula that's used to calculate incidence rates, you can see on the screen. N is the number of injuries that are reported, and or illnesses, illnesses that are reportable. EH represents the total employee hours worked by all employees during the calendar year. So employee hours here, and then that's multiplied by 200,000, and 200,000 is equivalent to 100 full-time employees, each working 50 weeks of 40 hours per week. So 50 weeks, assuming that there's a couple of weeks off, that people, generally on average have about 2 weeks off. I haven't heard of any calculations being required for incidence rates specifically. However, that does not mean that, that you won't see that on an exam. One of the other key terms that you want to be familiar with is on page 176. So an incident refers to a recordable case of either occupational injury, illness, or death. So that key term of recordable case, we'll talk about a little bit more, but be sure that you are familiar with that key term. So what are your rights? What are the workers' rights? So under OSHA, any employee can call up OSHA and request to have an inspection if they feel that there is a safety violation, that there's a potential hazard, that people can hurt. One second here. So that employee can call up and request an audit. All right, I mute the lines here real quick. Yeah, so we're going to talk about recordable incidents, and I did talk about transfer. So I'll go back to that and talk about that once more. So yeah, so thanks, Tess. One example of transfer is having workers' comp insurance. Basically, you're transferring the liability to that insurance company. The other example I gave is if you work for a global company, and even if not, your company's not global, but you send people overseas to areas that are potentially dangerous, maybe there's civil unrest or whatever is going on. Another way to transfer liability would be to hire a driver, a chauffeur, to physically pick people up from the airport, take them to the hotel, take them from the hotel to their meetings, from their meetings to their dinner, and then back to the hotel again. We're hiring security personnel to be with those people all the time, and then having like travel insurance that protects against things that happen. Yeah, sorry you missed that. Yeah, and the chats weren't showing up, but they just started to pop up here. So, okay, so workers' rights. Again, essentially, you can contact OSHA. If you have a concern and you say, hey, you know, this concern, here's what it is, OSHA goes through their process, which we'll talk about in just a bit, to determine whether or not they're going to come out and do an inspection. But workers' rights, you have the right to participate in union activities that are related to job safety. You have broader protections for participating in union activities anyway, but this one specifically relates to safety under OSHA. You have a right to participate in OSHA inspections, other hearings, and you also have a right to refuse to work if you reasonably believe that your environment is not safe and poses an imminent risk of death or serious bodily injury. We're going to define that key term of imminent danger. So if you think that there's an imminent risk, you have the right to refuse to not go to work. So I mentioned record keeping before. OSHA does require employers to keep a log of occupational injuries and illnesses that are recordable, and we'll talk about that criteria. So if they result in death, loss of consciousness, days away from work, restricted work activity or transfer, for example, if somebody's typically out in the field and they have to be transferred to a desk job, so that would be an example of a job transfer. And this is really the key here, is recordable incidents are medical treatment required beyond first aid. If you have a death in your facility, you are required to report within 8 hours. So if you have a death in your facility, you're required to report that death to OSHA within 8 hours. If you have something happen in the workplace where 3 or more of your employees are become inpatients in the hospital, they get checked in, you have to also report that within 8 hours. So death or 3 or more employees hospitalized. And then significant work-related injuries and illnesses also have to be recorded if they're diagnosed by a physician or other licensed healthcare professional. So let's say you're having some problems breathing, like I am because I'm battling a little bit of a cold here, but let's say that you just know, like, my breathing is labored, I feel like I can't completely inhale or exhale, and I'm just short of breath and I'm dizzy, and let's say you don't connect it to your work, but you go to the doctor and they start running tests and they discover something and they start asking you questions about your work. What kind of work do you do? What types of chemicals are you exposed to, etc. So even if you don't go, but your physician or someone else diagnoses you, and says, hey, this is most likely work related, that also has to be reported. Of course, you'd have to share that with your employer, but that is another recordable. On page 181, there's some detail in there about work-related injuries and illnesses that have to be recorded. So if there's a needle stick injury or a cut from a sharp object that is contaminated with other blood or infectious material, that is a recordable event. Any time an employee is required to be medically removed, that is another recordable event. TB or tuberculosis infection, diagnosed by a skin test or another physician, also has to be recorded. But if you go to the doctor, for example, let's say that you fall and you feel fine, but you fall and kind of, twisted your ankle a little bit, and they say, let's send you over and let's get this checked out. Let's say you go to the doctor and the doctor says you're fine. It's, maybe just a little bit of a bruise, but it's okay. There's no follow-up that's required. Then you would not have to, that would not be a recordable incident. If you broke your ankle, that would be a totally different story. All right, so let's talk about the forms that need to be kept. There are 3 different forms. So here's your formula for remembering 3 forms, and they all start with the number 3. So 3 different types of OSHA forms that must be kept. Form 301 is the Injury and Illness Incidents Report. And that is the very first knowing that something happened. So again, somebody fell and they went in for their visit. That is the form. It's like the who, what, where, when, and how. The Form 300 is a log of all of those injuries. So let's say you had completed 5 of these Form 301s in the year, and you have to complete them within 7 calendar days. All 5 of those would be transferred over to the log. So this is a log of all the work-related injuries and illnesses. And this gets cataloged, by the end of the year. It's a full detailed log. The Form 300A is a summary of all of those 5 that gets put into a summary report. It's due by the end of the year, and it has to be posted no later than February 1st and remain posted through April 30th. So here's your last 3. So I mentioned there are 3 forms that need to be completed. So 3 forms. All of those forms start with 3s. And how long does this log have to be posted? Who can do the quick math? 3. Yeah, so 3. All right, so let me go back to, yes, so I think I covered the question for what is not recordable. If you prick your finger with a pen and maybe you got to put a Band-Aid on it, that's not recordable either. Okay, good. Yeah, so 3 forms, all 3 of them start with the number 3, and you have to post the 300A for 3 months. I love little tricks to help me remember things. For me, they come in so handy. Although I took the SPHR exam many eons ago, I recently took a board certification exam for health and wellness coaching. So this is recent memory, and very much like the exam you're preparing to take. So I'm not out of test taking experience was my point. And I love the little memory devices. So I encourage you to come up with those as well. All right, so which of these work-related injuries would need to be recorded? A paper cut that bleeds enough to require a Band-Aid. B, a sprained ankle that needs to be wrapped. C, a needle stick from a needle that has been in contact with another person's blood. Or D, a splinter that is removable by a company nurse. All right. So the correct answer from the majority of you is C. So this is the recordable incident. The other 3 on here are not recordable. All right. So let's talk about hazards in the workplace. These are talking about, again, if we go back to risk management, these hazards are the things that we would look at one of those 4 strategies to make sure to lessen our exposure or be able to have strategies in place for if something does happen. So again, those 4 strategies: avoidance, transfer, mitigation, and acceptance. All right, so hazards in the workplace. Again, OSHA requires every employer to provide a safe and healthful work environment for all employees, and that includes knowing what hazards exist and then what standards apply. So there's a 3-step standard for creating a safe environment. The first is to eliminate, right? And that is the first strategy in risk mitigation, is to avoid it in the first place. So eliminate the hazard. Essentially you can eliminate the hazard by making sure that your racks are bolted to the walls in your warehouse. By making sure that every single person has the protective eye equipment that's required to use a particular piece of equipment, for example. The second is to follow safe work practices and provide training to avoid the accidents. If you have a forklift in your warehouse, everybody needs to be trained before they ever step foot on that forklift. They need to be certified, whatever it is. What are some other things you can think of? What are some other trainings you provide to avoid accidents in your office, in your environment? I used to work in a biotech company, and we had a laboratory where lab experiments were conducted. So we had a lot of training around proper use of equipment, proper disposal. We had bloodborne pathogens, so a lot there. Safety talks, ergonomics, yeah, absolutely. And new hire safety orientation, yeah. Depending on your work environment, you may not have, too many hazardous conditions, but some industries have a lot more than others. And then personal protective equipment, last line of defense as well. I mentioned the glasses a little bit earlier, but so I don't necessarily think of it as a last line of defense. Sometimes it's one of your first lines to defense, and I get it. You have to have other processes in place, like a shield on the saw to make sure that things aren't flying up into people's faces. All right. Yes, having a safety committee, and yeah, bloodborne pathogens. So you might do some baseline testing. We would be doing some baseline testing when people, before they're exposed to the pathogens, and then at intervals after that to make sure that nothing has changed. So safety inspections, you mentioned a safety committee. So safety inspections are twofold, well, more than that, but essentially you as an organization should be conducting your own safety inspections to make sure that you are, there isn't any obvious and imminent danger that's being, that employees are exposed to. OSHA, if they do come in, they are authorized to conduct workplace inspections, again, to enforce OSHA standards. There are conditions for inspections. I mentioned your employees can call OSHA and say, hey, we have this, this drill press that people are using, and we don't have the appropriate shields. And, I've seen people get hurt, blah, blah, blah. So in imminent danger, OSHA is going to come calling. So this is their priority. And with very few exceptions, these inspections are conducted without advance notice. Anyone here had OSHA show up without notice? Yes. Oh, I feel my blood pressure rising. my breath is shortening. Yeah, that's, I haven't had that experience. I can only imagine. It's nerve-wracking though. So the first thing they're going to respond to in order, imminent danger. And that is where somebody's serious physical risk is likely to happen, risk to health or life, limb, etc. if OSHA does come in and they find something, they can go for a restraining order to shut down the operation until it's corrected. If OSHA ever shows up, you want to follow their recommendations and make corrections immediately. The second is severe injuries and illnesses. So if you have to report within 8 hours. If 3 or more people are hospitalized, if someone dies, OSHA's definitely going to show up in that case. And even if there's a catastrophe, let's say that you have cargo and you have, it's a shipping and receiving company and one of your large trucks crashed through a building, like OSHA's going to show up. And then the third is those employee complaints of alleged violations. And again, that's the third line. Employees can submit anonymously. Of course, those employees are also protected against discrimination for doing so. And then on page 184, you have some additional conditions for safety inspections. So the next is referrals. Someone else might call, other federal, state, or local agencies, individuals outside of the organizations, the media maybe. OSHA will consider doing an inspection. Targeted inspections, basically is to investigate specific industries with high incidence rates. So what types of industries do you think might have a lot of accidents? Think of industries that are dangerous, potentially dangerous. It's inherent in the work. Yeah, construction, manufacturing, mining, corrections. Yeah, the federal may have their own, entity that comes in and does the inspection. States as well, nuclear plants. Yeah, you're right on. So some industries, I work in a professional office organization where, we're not high on an OSHA inspection list. I mean, we're probably at the very bottom. But yeah, if you work in some of these other industries and you have, not even just your company, but an industry that has high incidence rates overall, OSHA does do targeted inspections. And then the last are follow-up inspections. So OSHA does come back to ensure that violations have been corrected. And again, organizations can be held liable if the conditions are not corrected. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. I'm so sorry, I have not coughed all day today, and all of a sudden. Okay, so imminent danger, we've talked about this highest priority situations. And imminent danger is where there's a high probability that an accident may occur that will result in death or serious physical harm. So that's one of the objectives for us, is to know that key term of imminent danger. And know also that it's OSHA's highest priority situation. Makes sense. All right. Which of the following statements about emissions? A, they're announced at least 24 hours beforehand. B, employers can require OSHA to have a search warrant. C, OSHA inspects every establishment every 3 years. D, OSHA is not required to protect trade secrets discovered during an inspection. Oh, thanks for sharing, Chantel. That's interesting. All right, the correct answer is B. Nice job, everyone. Yeah, so yes, you can, when OSHA shows up at your door, say, I'm sorry, you need to have a search warrant to come in. How many of you are going to do that in practice? Not me, no way. No, with an exclamation point. Yes, you got the idea. Yeah, probably not. I mean, it's like, you know, they will come back, they will get that search warrant, and they are going to be fine-tooth comb, right, in that scenario. They're not going to be happy. Okay, so, but if you feel that you have a legitimate need to do that, then, in some circumstances, a corporate attorney may request that, but yeah, not likely. Oh, yeah, so they're nice people that work there. Yeah, I mean, really, that it's their job. Their job is to uphold OSHA, and so what is it about using honey to catch bees? So yeah, a little bit of kindness goes a long way. So there are criminal penalties. When violations do occur, it can be very costly. You see the 5 levels of violations on the screen and in your book. De minimis is the lowest level. Something might exist, but there's really no relationship between safety and health. And OSHA will say, hey, you really should fix this, just because, why wouldn't you? But it's not likely it's going to result in a serious injury or illness. Other than serious violations, there is a direct relationship to safety or health. Serious harm is unlikely. Penalties can be given at this level. Serious violation, it's a substantial probability of something happening, and death or serious physical harm, injury, illness, and the employer should have known or did know that there was a hazard. Again, penalties go penalties of the other than serious and serious start at the same amount and can go up from there, but also can be adjusted downward. Willful violations, intentional disregard. This goes against the general duty clause. The penalties are 10 times the amount of the other violations, and could also result in prison time if the violation results in death, or if there's a criminal conviction, the penalties go up as well. Repeated violations, basically OSHA comes in and says, hey, maybe they come in for one of those targeted inspections in a high-risk occupation industry, and say, here's your list. These 3 things need to be fixed immediately, and they come back to check, and you didn't do it. So a repeated violation can have additional penalties. Okay. This could include making false statements to OSHA as well. So, not only the violations, but trying to cover them up. There are certain industries, like I mentioned, the biotech industry where I worked, and the biotech company where I worked, we had hazardous chemicals, and there are manufacturing environments or other environments where hazardous chemicals are present in the workplace. So there is a risk. So employers have an obligation to identify the chemical as hazardous, have to provide the hazard warning, and also have to provide the chemical manufacturer, distributor, and employers are required to maintain a material safety data sheet for each hazardous chemical that is used or stored in the facility. And individuals have to have access to those safety data sheets. You can see the labeling requirements in addition to what's on the screen. There are some additional labeling requirements that are outlined on page 186. And employees have to be trained. So somebody mentioned earlier having a safety committee. And when you have that safety committee, there's typically someone on that safety committee who is responsible for maintaining the safety data sheets, or SDSs. Okay, so safety programs. There are several helpful tools on the OSHA website and procedures that are outlined by OSHA to help employers be in compliance. Like Tina mentioned earlier, they were really nice when they came. They really genuinely want to help us stay out of trouble in the first place. So there are procedures that are outlined for organizations to follow to help to maintain an ongoing safety program. So for a program to be effective, the worksite has to be analyzed, and typically you have involvement from employees that are cross-representative, different departments, different areas of the organization. So by law, you have to post the OSHA workplace poster. If you do have a safety committee, it's important that you meet regularly to discuss job safety and health matters. Make it a part of staff meetings, for example, if you have like a warehouse facility, that maybe different training topics are alternated or discussed. The employees should know what OSHA standards apply to them. Different industries have different requirements. So if your industry is one that has very specific requirements, an employee should know. You want to have a policy statement that comes from the top level of management. And top level of management has to demonstrate the commitment to safety and health, including following all of the safety and health procedures that are outlined by the organization. And when something does occur, that the safety committee is looking at accident reports and making sure that the hazards are eliminated. And then if you are part of a union, you're most likely going to have a labor management safety committee as well. So active participation in those is required. So which of the following is not one of the elements of a good safety program? A, identification and control of hazards. B, keeping information about accidents and injuries confidential. C, assignment of responsibility to a key executive. D, employee awareness and acceptance. Oops. All right, you all are on top of it. So yeah, it is not required that you keep information about accidents and illnesses, or injuries confidential. You already know you have to post the Form 300A, the log at the end of the year. It doesn't give specific personal information, but that statement is not completely true. Okay, safety training, more about safety training. So you have a safety committee. The safety training that should be conducted needs to include all of the employees and supervisors, management, everyone in the organization. And of course, certain parts of the organization, like a warehouse, those employees are going to receive additional safety training, but everybody should know the basics. So when you have a robust safety training program, you're establishing a culture where employees are helping to promote safety procedures while on the job and encouraging others to do the same. You have to have employees trained. I mentioned earlier, like if you have a forklift, for example, before any employee who's going to operate that forklift gets on that forklift, they have to have gone through the training and the certification standards. And it is important that training is provided right away, because if you read that section on the statistics will show you if comparing new employees to employees who have been on the job for a long time, newer employees are more likely than long-term workers to be involved in an accident. So again, that just goes back to the importance of training early and often if required. So there are a couple of things to point out under safety training. Employers are required to provide first aid treatment for injured workers. You either have to have someone on staff or you have to have emergency treatment services available within a very reasonable proximity of the work site. It is, of course, essential if somebody has a serious, like you think somebody's having a heart attack, that of course, first aid treatment has to be provided within a very short period of time. So even with assistance from calling 911, employees who provide first aid to injured coworkers are protected from prosecution for any kind of unintentional injury or wrongful death that occurs. All 50 states have Good Samaritan statutes. And employees are covered as long as it's during a bona fide emergency, that they're acting rationally and in good faith in accordance with their level of training, and that person's not getting paid to provide the medical treatment. So again, if you have the IED devices in your workplace for somebody who's having a cardiac event, the person who's using that device needs to be trained on using that device. Okay, so let's see. Anything else I want to say about that? I don't think so. Okay, so there are actually different partnerships, levels of partnerships and cooperative programs that employers can engage in with OSHA. They're voluntary programs. There are certain levels of qualification for some of them. And make sure that you're familiar with these. I'm not sure that I'm going to go into detail necessarily, but the OSHA Challenge, basically any organizations who graduate from the OSHA Challenge receives recognition from OSHA, and it's available to general industry and construction employers who work in the private and public sectors. So in general industry and construction employers. Alliances are cooperatives between OSHA and a participating company. They're based on setting short and long-term goals that cover things like training and education, safety principles, etc. So this is a formal program though. They do enter into an alliance, and OSHA representatives work together with the company to develop a specific program to meet whatever goals are defined. The OSPP, or OSHA Strategic Partnership Program, it's voluntary, it's written, and it's a long-term agreement. This is between OSHA and groups of employers. So the alliances are between OSHA and a company. The strategic partnership programs are with groups of employers. You'd see these in union settings. And again, with the aim to improve safety, eliminating serious hazards. A voluntary protection program, so if you have a workplace safety and health program, you can request recognition by OSHA to qualify for this voluntary protection program. And in this type of arrangement, labor, management, and OSHA establish a relationship whereby management agrees to abide by a specific set of criteria. And the employees are also involved, and they say, you know, yes, we're on board, and we are going to make sure that we continue to have a safe workplace. The company can be removed then from a list of scheduled inspections, but of course OSHA can come on site anytime they want to, but basically, and they have to reassure that the company still continues to comply with the voluntary protection program. Okay, let's see. And then the final is the Safety and Health Recognition Program, or SHARP. Basically, they're on-site consultation programs that recognize small business employers. And there are different levels of a voluntary protection program, and people who are in that program can qualify for this SHARP program. But essentially, they're for those who qualify. They continue to meet the standards. They receive outstanding achievements and ratings. If you receive this type of recognition, then OSHA exempts the work site from programmed inspections as long as the certification is valid. Any employer can request a free on-site consultation. And during that consultation, OSHA will come through and they'll walk through, and the employer's told exactly the OSHA standards that are applicable, what they mean. If violations are found, OSHA encourages the employers to correct them. And again, remember, now this would be a place where OSHA would come back to do a re-inspection, and if they find that violation was not corrected, then they can be fined. But not during the consultation visit. But again, if they come back and the employer failed to do it, then they can be fined at that point. All right, moving along here. A program OSHA has established to work with companies in reducing accidents, illnesses, and injuries that are voluntary, written, long-term agreements between OSHA and a group of employers, employees, union representatives, or other stakeholders is known as A-SHARP, BVPPs, COSPPs, D alliances. This is an example of a question where you would need to know what each of these acronyms means, right? All right, the correct answer is C, OSPPs. What does that acronym stand for? OSPP. Bonus question. Yeah, OSHA Strategic Partnership Program. Nice. Tina and Christina. Okay, so I mentioned that OSHA will show up in the case where there is a catastrophic accident. It's important for the employer to investigate actions the actions that lead up to an accident happening, so that you know what steps to take in the future to prevent the accident. And when OSHA does show up, and they see that you're taking a proactive stance on an investigation, that, it's a good faith effort. Nearly all worksite facilities, injuries, and illnesses are preventable. So it's the goal of every accident investigation to identify and correct the root cause. It's not about blaming people, but it really is identifying the root cause and making corrections. To prevent anything like what you see on the screen from happening in the future. So you know that Form 301, the Injury and Illness Incident Report, is required to be completed, including the circumstance of the accident, the nature of the accident, how the accident was handled. So it's the, who, what, why, where, and when, how. Fatalities, you have 8 hours to report. We already talked about that. And that the Form 301 and Form 300 have to be completed within 7 calendar days after a reportable event occurs. Those records have to be retained for 5 years following the calendar year in which the report was made. All right, so the Drug Free Workplace Act, essentially, this act applies to government contractors, and it's a good faith effort. It's an attempt to ensure a drug-free, an earnest attempt to ensure a drug-free workplace environment. Although it only applies to government contractors, most employers, private employers, small and large, have a policy about drug-free workplace. But employers who are covered under the Act are required to prohibit unlawful drug use in the workplace and have a drug awareness education program for employees. Okay. So workers' compensation, we're not going to spend a lot of time here because I think you've talked about workers' compensation already. It's a required benefit. You know that when you talk about compensation and benefits. Essentially, it's a no-fault insurance. There are, however, 3 circumstances in which an employer can argue that workers' compensation should not be paid. Assumption of risk, the fellow servant defense, and contributory negligence are the 3 common law defenses an employer can use. And a little bit about each of those is shared on page 196. But basically, if you go to work for a mining company, you know that risk is inherent in the job. So if there's an explosion or if somebody's trapped, of course, workers' compensation is going to cover any injuries or illnesses. But common accidents that happen, the employer could say, this is just an inherent risk, and an ordinary risk that this individual would see, and therefore the employer is not liable. The fellow servant rule basically says employer is not liable if co-workers were negligent and contributed in any way to the cause of the accident. So if you have a coworker who spilled some water on the floor, knew they spilled the water on the floor and failed to clean it up, and you came in and slipped, the employer could argue the fellow servant rule. And then contributory negligence basically says, yeah, we know you fell off that ladder, but you put a box on top of the highest step on the rung, and essentially you caused your own injury. Okay. All right. Yeah, so you're right, Don. The common law defenses were prior to workers' comp laws, but essentially, and an employer can still argue. The assumption of risk thing is, I've never heard of that one being argued, but fellow servant, probably not as common as contributory negligence. But if you have very strict safety laws in place, like I mentioned, like, hey, oh, I didn't feel like going to get the ladder to, put that sign up there. So I just stacked some boxes up and I stepped on the boxes and they collapsed and therefore I fell and broke my ankle. An employer could say, that was your own negligence. I've worked when I had my HR consulting business, I worked in a warehouse environment where, it's just ridiculous what can go on in there. But essentially, this was an action sports company, and it was discovered that some of the employees were like rolling around on their skateboards inside of the warehouse. So if somebody got hurt doing that, the employer would say, hey, I'm not liable for this. You were violating company policy and you contributed to your own negligence. So they're not common, but an employer can absolutely still argue, in their defense. Yeah, I know. There's some companies, it feels like they go over the top, but there's probably a reason for it. All right, so return to work programs. Essentially, when somebody does get injured, we really as employers want to get them back to work as soon as possible. And it's not just because we need a body doing the job. We are concerned, at least the companies that I've worked for are concerned for the well-being of their employees. And we want to bring people to work just as soon as possible. We don't want them sitting at home, with their injuries and feeling down that they can't get out and do things. So working in cooperation with the physician, you can have specific return to work programs where an employee can be, for example, I used an example earlier, maybe someone's out in the field and they come back early, can't be in the field, but they can work within the office environment where the demands are less. Okay, company by the company's A, unionization status, B, wage and salary levels, C, annual revenues, D, experience rating. All right. Yes. So experience rating is one of those key terms used, and in this case, used to determine the company's workers' compensation costs. Where else is the experience rating used to determine costs? In what other area? Just a pop quiz, taking you back. Yep, unemployment. That's right, unemployment rates. Yep, so experience rating is used in both workers' comp and to determine costs for unemployment. All right, nice job. Okay, so let's see, that brings us to the end of this section, and there are 13 test your knowledge questions. And I'm going to get started with health and we'll just go as far as we can in the next 5 minutes. If I do go a little bit over and you have to hop off, I completely understand. Thank you for being with me here tonight. I wish you the happiest of holidays and, of course, the best of luck on your exam. All right, so we are on page 201. And your objectives are here on the screen. We're going to talk about health. So we want to look at best practices and programs that will encourage. I mentioned the Walmart example. Let's eliminate these McDonald's. Let's not make it so easy for our employees to eat unhealthy foods every day that they come to work. We're also going to look at, what are the benefits? Of course, you all can guess the benefits of having healthy employees, and then more OSHA standards that focus this time on a healthy work environment. So we already know that OSHA requires you to provide a safe and healthy workplace. We talked about that. And we know too that any health programs that you have in place benefit not only the employees, but also the employers. So reduced health insurance expenses, reduced absenteeism, higher productivity. The first such program are employee assistance programs, and or an EAP, and they provide direct and confidential assistance to employees that have a variety of issues. So it could be anything from family conflict, financial worries, estate planning or will planning, to alcoholism, drug abuse, etc. Family counseling. This is an important distinction. EAPs that provide only referral services. So here's a list of people you can call that can help you set up a will. Okay? You're just providing names. They're not required to comply with ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. However, if you have an EAP that also provides counseling services, then you are required to comply with the reporting and disclosure requirements of ERISA. Okay, so if it's just a referral service, here's some phone numbers in your area, here's a list of resources, you don't have to comply with ERISA. But if you provide counseling services, then you're required to comply with ERISA. Some large employers have their own EAP. Most companies contract EAP services, though, through a third-party provider. It helps to ensure employee confidentiality because it's a totally separate entity. There's cost effectiveness associated. Typically, it's a bundled service. And buying power, gives you a wider array of services. Typically, there are no direct cost to employees, but referred services, so treatment for drug and alcohol abuse, is paid for by the employee if there are those costs associated beyond whatever free visits you might have with counseling services. And health insurance could also kick in. There are some characteristics that are outlined in Exhibit 13 on page 6 of an effective EAP, or employee assistance programs. You want to keep those in mind as well. One of the keys to utilization, having utilization in EAPs, is ensuring confidentiality and keeping the services top of mind, and not constantly, but communicating frequently about the services that are available. Employee wellness programs, I think it's like 80% of employers have some sort of wellness programs that are available to employees. Smaller companies, have more simple employee wellness programs than larger organizations have. But they're designed to offer preventive care services. So these are services that really encourage employees to adopt healthy lifestyles and proactively manage chronic diseases like diabetes. So I've worked in the health coaching industry for the last 10 years. And wellness services were, types of services that we provided. I'm on the training and development end, but so your services can range from, maybe a small reimbursement for gym memberships all the way up to complex and comprehensive services that include like health coaches, webinars, health assessments, etc. Some employers also offer rewards to encourage employee participation, so there could be small financial rewards, etc. All right, and I think it's already 1 minute over. So last knowledge check. Which of the following is true about employee assistance programs? A, the program should be accessible from 9 to 5 or during all regular business hours. B, all problems and conditions reported by the EAP should be reported to management and the employee supervisor. C, plan participants should be required to meet with EAP staff at the EAP office. D, the program should be open to all employees and family members. Okay, really super job. Yeah, so the correct answer is D. Program should be open to all employees and family members. And again, we're going to stop here. So when you meet on Thursday, be prepared to pick up where we left off. And that is your last regularly scheduled class, so be prepared to take it all the way to the end. Thanks so much again for being here and going over just a little bit here, being with me. Again, I wish you the best of luck on your upcoming exams and with your studies. And yes, I will go back to the last knowledge check. You are welcome. Thank you. So the company's workers' compensation costs are determined by the company's D experience rating. Yes, my pleasure. Yes, and if you have questions, go ahead and put them in chat. Right. You're welcome. Thank you.